history is disappearing. And video game history, at least to me, and I hope to a lot of you folks out there, is pretty important because video game history is a part of our cultural landscape nowadays. The modern technological world that we live in is built on the backs of a lot of software that was developed by video game people over the years. And you look at a lot of the cultural aspects of it as well. Like there's phrases that exist that would not exist for video games. Game over, level up. These are things that are part of our cultural lexicon now that only came about because of video games, and they have meaning because of them. So it's important to preserve and understand where we came from. So there's a couple of different ways that people preserve video game history. I'm going to talk about 3 different ways today. The first is straight up recording developer stories. So the people who made these games are people that you want to understand the context in which they lived. And modern games journalism actually does a really good job of preserving the stories of these people. Waypoint, which is Vice's gaming site, did a huge thing on the history of Halo, probably one of the biggest games of all time. And various books, various stories have been told about Doom. Again, probably even bigger first-person shooter at the time. You will learn about the history of id Software. Like John Romero, one of the creators of Doom, will tell, well, basically anybody, but he will tell everybody about how he coded Doom while listening to Queensryche. And if you understand a little bit, I thought Queensryche would get a bigger, but you can understand the cultural context in which he comes from. But there are people that we don't have the stories of. William Higinbotham, which I doubt very many people have heard of in here, he created a game called Tennis for Two on a goddamn oscilloscope. This is considered, if not the first, then one of the first video games ever made. This guy worked on the Manhattan Project. And, like, I would love to know how he got to building this. Like, was he learning this new room-scale computer thing that the government had bought? Was he, just kind of messing around? Or did he actually want to create something with technology that was creative as opposed to destructive? We don't know. He unfortunately died in 1994. And no one really recorded what he thought about Tennis for Two. The thing is, though, we are at a point in history right now where those stories are still available. Those people are still alive. We can learn about the very early history of video games if we so care to. But these people will not be around forever. Now, the second form of preservation is something that's a little bit more familiar, physical artifacts. Actually having materials and things from the past. So I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of one of the most famous gaming machines of all time, the original NES. So, the original NES, fun thing about this is we don't know when it launched, outside of 1985. Because it was a very gradual rollout. No one knows when it first appeared in stores. And more importantly, we don't know what Nintendo was thinking when they brought it over. We knew that the US gaming market had basically crashed after the fall of Atari. We know that it was a very bad time for video games. So how did Nintendo position this so that they thought that the NES would sell? And it took an archivist to actually go back through the history, digging through a whole bunch of crap to find the first ad that Nintendo ever ran in North America. This is it. This is... So, this tells you actually a lot about what they were thinking. First of all, you can't see it. Because they knew that the market was so bad that, like, oh, another video game console, whatever. Like, the audience wouldn't really care about it. It actually says down here, even skeptics are welcome. They didn't actually, they knew that it was a very, people wouldn't necessarily respond to it. But the other thing that fascinates me about this is look at what they put it up against. Pong and tennis for the Commodore 64. They knew coming into this, they had to not be seen as an interloper because, quite frankly, they were Japanese. They knew that they had to put themselves in the lineage of American video games in order to succeed. And as the story goes on, they did. They totally did. So Nintendo obviously had a lot of various moments in video game history that they were there most at that point. And one of those points I want to talk about right now is the war between Nintendo and Sony. So real basic background on this. Nintendo, around the end of the lifespan of the Super NES, would go to Sony and say like, hey, Sega's making a CD add-on for the Genesis, we want you to make one for the Super NES. And Sony's like, hell yeah, like you are the biggest consumer electronics sales company in the world, we absolutely want to get some of that. But at E3, after Sony had created a couple of prototypes and Nintendo's like, this is great, we love this. At E3, Nintendo said, we're making a CD add-on with Philips, not Sony. And Sony was absolutely caught flat-footed by this, and they were pissed. So pissed that they said, fuck you, we're taking our CD add-on, we're making our own console, calling it the PlayStation, and burying it. Which they basically did for a very long time. But the interesting thing about this is that we know the story, but we don't necessarily have a good insight into that time, because there weren't any physical artifacts with it. Until about 3 years ago, someone discovered the Nintendo PlayStation. This is actually incredible that this thing still exists. After Nintendo broke their deal with Sony, Sony destroyed most, apparently, of the prototypes, but missed one. And this is incredible for a number of reasons, because you can actually go look at the actual structure of the circuit board, how they designed like early CD-ROM technology. My favorite thing about this is if you look at this and you look at how the plastic has yellowed, it yellows in the exact same way that the Super NES yellows. Meaning, Sony went straight to Nintendo suppliers in the hope to impress Nintendo to create their own thing. And said, made it look as Nintendo-y as possible. They were really, really hoping to get this Nintendo deal. So makes their gamble on PlayStation all the more incredible. Here's an even more remarkable thing about this. It works. It took a little bit of fiddling, but you can actually play games on the Nintendo PlayStation, a piece of hardware of which there is probably only one in the world. You can see how the software interacts. You can see how they booted the thing. It's absolutely incredible that this thing exists, and it's remarkable that we have this piece of video game history. I want to see this thing, I would love to see this thing, but it only makes very limited appearances for obvious reasons. So, there's one more physical artifact that I want to talk to you guys about, and this involves moving away from Nintendo for now. One of the most prominent video game characters of all time, Carmen Sandiego. Yes, you all found it. So, the thing about Carmen Sandiego is that this series, made by Broderbund, I think everybody knows it, it is the most popular edutainment series basically ever made. Where in time, where in the USA, where in the world, all that kind of stuff. But at the height of their popularity, teachers loved this game because kids were actually learning while playing video games. But a group of parents came and said, we love this stuff, but we want to approach Broderbund to do a local version. Because how great would it be if they could learn about local history and culture if they had a video game to do it? And so a group of teachers went to Broderbund and said, hey, we'll supply the questions, you can only sell to, you sell only to us, and you don't have to market this thing, we'll just buy whatever you make. And Broderbund's like, yeah, of course, we have a system we can put it into, let's do that. So they went and they created, where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego? This is real. This is absolutely real. So, the thing is, when they made this, they made Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego, shipped it to North Dakota schools, and it was apparently a gigantic hit in North Dakota. But it was pretty much at the tail end of the Apple II, and as that technology got obsolete, they basically got thrown away, shuttered aside, or whatnot, and this game was believed to be lost for a very long period of time. It took an archivist actually going to North Dakota to talk to some of these teachers, and they had not only the box and the almanac, but they had design documents, correspondence with Broderbund, and things they could do. And even most remarkably, the game. The game exists now. The game you can actually go to archive.org and play. It's fucking hard, I'll tell you that much. But that brings me to actually the third form of digital preservation, and that's just straight up preserving the games and the software themselves. So there's a lot of challenges with that, mainly because the mediums that are used to store this degrade, as any physical thing would do. Hard drives get rot, disks lose their magnetic charge. CD-ROMs will actually lose their data through a process called bit rot, which is where the blue dye here that is used to preserve the data just kind of corrodes and goes away. This gold swath here is data that is just gone. Like, it doesn't exist anymore. The half-life of a lot of these are about 20 years, depending on how you store it and what materials it's made out of, etc. But there is another way to preserve this data. Say, for example, you had a series of distributed servers that are connected by a network, say the internet, and you could go and actually preserve them there. So the people that are doing most of the archiving work these days are pirates. Piracy and the actual downloading and preservation of ROMs is done by people who either love these games or have the interest in preservation and actually preserve them. And you can play them on emulators. The biggest one is MAME, which is, wow, MAME love, cool. Multiple arcade machine emulator. It started off as just emulating arcade machines. Now it emulates over 2,000 different operating systems, game systems, etc. Everything from the Amiga to the ZX Spectrum. These games, like, the fact that this exists as an open source project, some of the things don't work so well, but it's constantly being improved. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was kind of a boom in emulation. I'm sure a lot of people here have played games emulated on things like Nesticle, things like ZSNES, all these kind of things. But basically, the thing about this is that the platform holders hate this because they feel that you are basically playing their games illegally. In fact, this is actually what is on Nintendo's site right now, a legal fact about emulation. They use the word illegal 18 times. They say that, you know, their emulators are illegal. It's that simple and not open to debate. Emulation is illegal. Except it's not. In Sony versus Kinectix, which was a court case before, I believe, the Ninth Circuit in 2000, emulators were ruled to be fair use. You can actually build an emulator and use it. I mean, there's a little bit more gray area when it comes to actually downloading ROMs that you don't own and stuff like that, so I'm not advocating go out and do illegal stuff. I'm not a lawyer. But basically, emulation is actually a pretty good preservation tool. And actually, the Library of Congress in recent days has carved out an exception to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that if an emulator is used for archival purposes, it's perfectly legal. And it's a little bit hypocritical for Nintendo to say that when they use emulation themselves. So when they launched the Wii console, they allowed you to buy, download, and play emulated games. They would sell games to you, and you could play, you know, Super Mario Brothers on your Wii in an entirely legal way, and they would make money off of it. But then people started digging a little bit into the files of this, and this is the code for Super Mario Brothers that you'd get from the Wii Virtual Console. I want to draw your attention to this line here. This is called an INES header. This is a piece of code that is appended to the game that allows it to be played in an emulator. But here's the kicker, not Nintendo's emulator. An actual person who developed an emulator, oh no, I'm getting there. Not Nintendo's emulator, in third-party emulators. But what is this doing in a Nintendo official product? And it took a couple minutes to realize that Nintendo downloaded Super Mario Brothers from the internet and sold it back to you. Yeah. You think with their hardline attitude, yeah, they'd be a little less hypocritical, but of course not. What worries me about this, actually, is does Nintendo just not have a copy of Super Mario Brothers that they can actually, like, preserve? The game that made them? It's a little bit weird and it's a little bit worrisome to me if they don't actually have that attitude towards preserving their legacy. Some companies do. Some companies actually will take an active hand in the preservation of their own properties. A couple of years ago, actually, Capcom released the Mega Man Legacy Collection, which is a compilation of Mega Man's 1 through 6, fully playable, and it includes a museum where you can actually go and see the concept art. You can see pictures of the dev team. You can see like a lot of the original sound files, things like that. It was an attempt to make a quote-unquote Criterion collection for a video game character. And it sold pretty well for a very low cost. It was actually very, very profitable for Capcom. But even if a company does take an active hand in preserving their legacy, there's other challenges that come with that. And one of the biggest challenges is for online games that evolve. And for that, let's just talk about the biggest one by Blizzard, World of Warcraft. So, the World of Warcraft of 2004 is very different from the one today. World of Warcraft in 2018 has gone through a lot of changes. Technically, it's a different engine. The engine's been improved. The character models look a lot better. The skill trees are different. And the landmass itself has changed. Lore-wise, there was a cataclysm in World of Warcraft. There was a giant dragon, and it's a whole story. But a lot of those realms are very, very different looking than what they looked like in 2004. And I can't go back to 2004 WoW and play it, unfortunately, and I would love to because WoW today is WoW. People know World of Warcraft. But in 2004, this was the latest evolution of games like EverQuest and Ultima Online. This was basically Blizzard's answer, Blizzard's response to that. How did they adapt? How did we get from here to there? And we can't actually see that, unfortunately. Blizzard has announced that they're going to be releasing World of Warcraft Classic, but we don't know if it's the original, like warts and all, if there's going to be quality of life updates or whatnot. I would want to see this preserved, and I hope that Blizzard does have this preserved somewhere. Now, even if you have the best intentions, even if you do want to preserve your legacy, there's sometimes external forces that prevent you from doing it. The game No One Lives Forever, which is a fantastic game. It's in the vein of Austin Powers, kind of a spy thriller in the 60s, starring Kate Archer here. Like, this game was incredible. I love this game to death. It was made by a company named Monolith. And Monolith, unfortunately, just later on in their history, got bought, split up, sent to different places. Part of it went to Vivendi, Fox Searchlight, Warner Brothers, and now no one actually knows who owns No One Lives Forever. They've looked. They have gone back and they've said, like, like the lawyers say, yeah, we can't actually find any documentation here. And they could make a good chunk of change if they were actually put this out, but they don't want to because of potential legal challenges. And so this game is lost to history were it not for pirates. So, pirates and archivists, and actually I do want to call out some of the specific video game archive associations that actually do help here. The Video Game History Foundation, which and the archive.org, the Internet Archive. The former preserves the physical artifacts and stuff like that, and makes them publicly available to view online. A lot of my slides are from them, actually. And the Internet Archive actually has, they've ported DOSBox and MAME to JavaScript so you can actually play preserved games in your browser. So you can go, you can play Oregon Trail, you can go play Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego, and really hard. But they are actually doing the good work of preserving video game history. And again, video game history is our history. Video game history is really a part of our culture. And what we, where we are now is very much a product of the people and the stories that existed in the past. The people who actually helped develop these games and what motivated, what moved them. And in order to understand where we're going to be and where we're going with video games and our technology and our software, we need to understand where we are now and we need to understand where we came from. And the preservation of video game history is an extremely important thing to understand all of that. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Go to nerdnight.com to find a Nerd Night event near you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for our latest presentation.